Hello, this is Mike, and I'm going to go over the lesson plan that Travis Carelli and I created. It's for a 10th grade class on world history, and the title of the unit is History of Tobacco Use. So let's dive on in. For our essential literacy strategy focus, it's identify the growth of tobacco in different parts of the world, and content focus is going to be the social, economic, and political effects of the growth of tobacco in Europe and in the Americas. And the way we're going to back all of this up is with these standards down here. Specifically, our ELA literacy standard is to analyze in detail a series of events described in the text, determine whether earlier events caused later ones, or simply preceded them. So here, obviously, for our social science or history, we have a lot of cause and effect relationships, so that's why we went with this standard here. History social science is to describe the rise of industrial economies and their link to imperialism and colonialism, and how those played a role in strategic advantages. And right here, we decided to cross out things that weren't going to be discussed or that weren't going to be used in our lesson plans, such as social Darwinism and the missionary impulse. As we all know, whenever we use one of these standards, we have to put the entire standard word for word, but we just cross out the things that aren't going to be included. So we are going to discuss issues such as land, resources, and technology. And for the ELD standard, it will be offering and justifying opinions, negotiating with and persuading others in a communicative exchange. So there's going to be a lot of opinions and discussions. So students are going to be expected to create a timeline and a poster after they do research on the history of tobacco. And they're going to be asked to pair and share and discuss. So that's why this standard is here. Instructional learning objectives. You see the words here in bold. We chose to highlight the verbs such as describe, identify, and compare, because that's just what we're looking to see from our students. So students are going to describe the growth of the tobacco industry from the introduction of tobacco into Europe to the present. And the way we're going to assess this would be formally by them filling out their tobacco timeline and a graphic organizer, which will have some focus questions on them. And all of these are going to be a one-to-one relationship. So whatever you see here is going to be assessed on this side. So students will identify the ways in which tobacco has been used in different time periods / cultures. So that's going to be assessed with a group poster that they're going to be signing. And finally, students will compare their views of tobacco through an economic and historical lens. And that's going to be informal through pair-share discussion. And moving on to language function, the way I understand language function has to be present in the essential literacy focus strategy. So identify, as seen up there, and it is seen down here as well. So identify. Vocabulary, there's going to be a couple of words that maybe students aren't familiar with, such as cultivation, commercial, industry, indigenous. Some of these words might have a double meaning, but that's why we included them here, because they are in the history context. Discourse would be, as already mentioned, class discussion, written timeline, and collaborative poster, how we're going to assess our students. Resources and material. So again, they're going to design their timeline, and they're going to have a graphic organizer, tobacco handout. They're going to be expected to do some research. So we have the tobacco history websites here, and your materials for making your posters and PowerPoints. All right, so the prior knowledge, we decided to talk about how students are familiar with doing research through websites, so that's going to be a familiar aspect for them. And also tobacco use, as seen on TV, on ads, and maybe in stores around their neighborhood. So they're already exposed to tobacco in general. So the traditional or transition from previous activity is going to be we decided to say that we had a previous lesson on imperialism and the global economy. And basically, just to build off of this lesson here, we're going to start off with the hook, talking about cigarettes, and have an image of a cigarette on the screen just to kind of get them to answer questions about where they think tobacco originated and where it was prevalent, who used it the most, um, what were its purposes, and eventually how it became so popular after it was introduced by Columbus during the 1400s. So the focused instruction here would be modeling, and this is how the teacher is going to present the lesson to the students. So there's going to be a number of discussion questions about the history of tobacco, and we're going to be asking for the students' opinions about its purpose. We're going to hand out their tobacco timeline and graphic organizer with the focused questions. And basically, the teacher is going to model how the students are expected to do their research and to answer their questions. So the modeling will also serve to show English learners how to effectively answer the questions. So that leads us to scaffolds and differentiating. The teacher's going to call out on students using equity cards, so no one's going to be excluded. And for our ELs, we're going to have more open-ended questions that they can answer. And for our accelerated learners, they're going to have a deeper analysis questions. Guided instruction. So the teacher is going to pair up students in groups of 4 or 5, and they're each going to be assigned a section on to search for topics of the tobacco history. And here, when they do their research, they're going to put all their answers into their graphic organizer, and they're going to have their guiding questions there. After they compile their answers and findings, they're going to engage in a jigsaw of the history of tobacco. And basically, they're going to learn from each other. So each group is going to present their findings to the class. Again, scaffolding, students with disabilities and EL students will be given specific questions to answer, but at the same time, they're going to be participating with everyone in the discussion. And EL students will have the opportunity to take their timelines home if they haven't completed them. Finally, independent practice. Once the students have compiled their research, they're going to present their findings to the class. The teacher is going to call out on students from each group using equity cards, so maybe one of each. And students will use the poster board to create a visual timeline and to share it out with the class. So everyone's going to have their timeline, they're going to piece it together, and eventually we're going to have a big timeline from the beginning to modern use or current use of tobacco. So scaffolds, again, EL students will be provided with links to locate the answers when they're doing their research on the internet. And finally, for closure, the teacher's just going to make sure students have completed their assignments, and afterwards, we're just going to collect their graphic organizers and poster timelines as exit slips. So that's our lesson plan here.